That sunny afternoon in a quiet suburban neighborhood started like any other. A gentle breeze rustling through the trees, children playing on the sidewalks, and neighbors exchanging warm greetings as they went about their day. The kind of scene that felt safe, even predictable. But sometimes, even the most peaceful moments can shift in an instant, like the calm before an unexpected storm. Mrs. Evelyn Carter, a soft-spoken woman in her late 60s, was on her usual walk to the corner store. Everyone in the neighborhood knew her. She had that unmistakable way of making people smile, whether it was with her infectious laugh or the way she'd offer a kind word to strangers. She walked with a slight limp these days, a reminder of years of hard work and sacrifice, but she never let it slow her down. To those who knew her, Evelyn wasn't just a neighbor, she was the heart of the block. As Evelyn rounded the corner onto Maple Street, a group of bikers roared past. The sound of their engines shattered the tranquility, leaving behind a tense energy that hung in the air. Most people didn't pay them much mind. They were used to the occasional group speeding through town. But today, something felt different. One biker in particular, a large man with a leather vest and a skull emblazoned across his back, broke away from the group. He pulled over near the small market just as Evelyn reached the entrance. No one saw what sparked the exchange. Maybe it was a misunderstanding, or perhaps the man was having a bad day and decided to take it out on someone vulnerable. Whatever the reason, the sight of this towering figure standing over Evelyn caught the attention of a few passers-by. Their words were muffled by the sounds of traffic, but the tension was clear. Evelyn, ever composed, seemed to be trying to de-escalate the situation, her hands raised in a calm gesture. But then, in an instant, everything changed. The biker's movements were sudden, almost too fast to process. His fist connected, and Evelyn crumpled to the ground. Gasps rippled through the onlookers, a mix of shock and disbelief. This was Evelyn, the woman who baked cookies for neighborhood kids and took care of stray cats. How could anyone hurt her? The man didn't linger. He glanced around, his expression a mix of defiance and indifference, and then casually climbed back onto his bike. With a roar of the engine, he sped off, leaving Evelyn unconscious on the pavement. People rushed to her aid, but the shock lingered, a heavy weight in the air. Unbeknownst to the biker, a young man had just parked his car a block away, unaware of the scene unfolding. Dressed in jeans and a simple shirt, he blended in with the crowd, giving no hint of his training or the years he had spent honing skills that most people only see in action movies. This was Marcus Carter, Evelyn's son. An off-duty Navy SEAL, Marcus had come home for a rare visit, eager to spend time with his mother and catch up on life. He had no idea that within minutes he would be thrust into a situation that would test everything he'd learned in his years of service. As Marcus walked toward the market, his steps unhurried, he noticed the commotion ahead. A small crowd had gathered, and he felt that familiar tug of instinct, a sixth sense developed from years in dangerous situations. Something was wrong. Quickening his pace, he scanned the faces in the crowd until his eyes landed on the figure on the ground. Time seemed to stop. That was his mother. His heart raced as he pushed through the crowd, kneeling beside her. She was breathing, but the sight of the bruise forming on her cheek ignited a fire within him. What happened? He asked, his voice steady, but edged with urgency. The witnesses hesitated, their words tumbling over one another in a chaotic rush. Finally, someone pointed down the street. It was a biker, they said. He took off that way. Marcus stood, his mind already working. The Navy had taught him to remain calm under pressure, to assess before acting. But this wasn't just another mission. This was personal. With a glance back at his mother, who was beginning to stir, he made a decision. Whoever this man was, wherever he thought he could hide, he had no idea what was coming for him. And with that, Marcus set off down the street, his focus unwavering. The biker had no clue that the son of the woman he'd just attacked wasn't just any man. He was a trained warrior. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Marcus's mind raced as he moved down the street, his footsteps deliberate yet calm. Years of military training had conditioned him to control his emotions, to stay sharp and focused, even when adrenaline surged through his veins. But this was his mother, the woman who had raised him, sacrificed for him, and loved him unconditionally. Seeing her hurt, lying on the ground, had lit a fire in him that no amount of training could completely suppress. The people he passed on the sidewalk sensed his determination. Some stepped aside, others trying to offer words of explanation or point him in the direction the biker had gone. But Marcus wasn't listening anymore. His mind was already working through what he'd need to do next. He didn't have his usual gear, no tactical tools, no backup team. But he had his instincts, his training, and a clear mission: find the man who had hurt his mother. As he rounded a corner, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it at first, but the second buzz made him pause. Pulling it out, he saw the name of his childhood friend, David, flashing on the screen. David still lived in the neighborhood and knew just about everyone who passed through. If anyone had a lead, it would be him. "David," Marcus said, his voice low but urgent. "Marcus, man, I just heard what happened. Is your mom okay?" David's voice was tight with concern. "She's conscious now. Paramedics are on the way, but she's going to be okay," Marcus replied. His tone softened for a moment, but it quickly hardened again. "Listen, I need your help." A biker, big guy, leather vest with a skull emblem, just took off after attacking her. "Do you know anyone like that? Maybe someone who's been hanging around town?" David hesitated. "Yeah, I think I know the group. They've been riding through here the past couple of weekends. They're not from around here, though. Word is they stop at the old gas station on Route 14 before heading out of town." Marcus didn't need to hear more. "Thanks, David. I owe you one." "Hey, Marcus," David added before he could hang up, "be careful. These guys aren't the friendly type. They're not afraid to start trouble." "I'll be fine," Marcus said, already moving again. He ended the call and slipped his phone into his pocket. Route 14 wasn't far, a few miles at most. He could make it there on foot if he kept his pace steady. As he walked, memories of his mother flooded his mind. Evelyn Carter wasn't just a kind neighbor or a doting parent. She was a fighter. When Marcus's father passed away unexpectedly, Evelyn had stepped up, working 2 jobs to keep food on the table and a roof over their heads. She never complained, never asked for help, even when things were tough. She had taught Marcus the value of resilience, the importance of standing up for what's right. And now, someone had dared to harm her. The thought made Marcus clench his fists as he quickened his stride. Meanwhile, at the gas station on Route 14, the biker leaned casually against his motorcycle, oblivious to the storm heading his way. His name was Rick, and he was no stranger to confrontation. He wasn't part of a formal gang, just a loose group of bikers who enjoyed raising a little hell whenever they rode through town. To Rick, what had happened outside the market was nothing more than a fleeting moment of annoyance. He didn't think twice about the elderly woman or the consequences of his actions. People like her were invisible to him, just obstacles in his path. As Rick lit a cigarette, he glanced at his watch. The rest of his crew would be meeting him soon, and they'd be back on the road before anyone could make trouble. That was the plan, at least. What he didn't know was that trouble was already closing in. Marcus reached the edge of town just as the sun began to dip below the horizon. The air was cooler now, the shadows longer, but he didn't slow down. As he approached the gas station, he saw a single bike parked near the pumps. A figure stood nearby, smoking, his leather vest unmistakable in the fading light. Marcus stopped a safe distance away, taking a moment to assess the situation. One man, no obvious weapons, but Marcus knew better than to assume he wasn't dangerous. Confronting someone like this head-on could go south quickly, especially without backup. But this wasn't a military mission. This was personal. He moved closer, his steps silent, until he was within earshot. "Hey," Marcus called out, his voice steady but commanding. Rick turned, his brow furrowing as he sized up the man approaching him. "What do you want?" he asked, flicking his cigarette to the ground. Marcus stopped a few feet away, his eyes locked on Rick. "You were at the market earlier. You hit an elderly woman." Rick shrugged, his expression indifferent. "So what?" "She was in my way." For a moment, Marcus didn't respond. He just stared at Rick, his jaw tightening. The man's lack of remorse was infuriating, but Marcus forced himself to stay calm. Reacting out of anger wouldn't help anyone. "You're going to come with me," Marcus said finally. "You're going to explain yourself to her. And then you're going to face the consequences of what you did." Rick laughed, a low, mocking sound. "You think you can tell me what to do? You don't know who you're messing with." "I know exactly who I'm dealing with," Marcus replied, his voice like steel. "And I'm not giving you a choice." Rick's smirk faded as he realized Marcus wasn't bluffing. He took a step closer, his stance aggressive. "You want to do this here, tough guy? Fine, let's see what you've got." Marcus didn't move, didn't flinch. His gaze remained steady, his posture relaxed but ready. He wasn't just a man confronting a bully. He was a trained warrior who knew how to end a fight before it even began. But just as the tension reached its peak, the distant sound of engines broke through the silence. Rick's crew was on their way, their bikes rumbling like thunder in the distance. Marcus glanced in the direction of the noise, calculating his next move. He wasn't afraid of a group, but the situation was about to get a lot more complicated. Rick grinned, emboldened by the approaching reinforcements. "Looks like you're out of time, hero," he taunted. Marcus didn't respond. He didn't need to. His focus remained razor sharp, his mind already running through the possibilities. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. And if Rick thought he could hide behind his crew, he was about to learn just how wrong he was. The rumble of approaching motorcycles grew louder, reverberating through the otherwise quiet evening. Marcus stood his ground, his posture calm yet brimming with intent. The noise didn't intimidate him. If anything, it only sharpened his focus. He wasn't looking for a fight, but he wasn't afraid of one either. His mission was clear, and no matter how many bikers showed up, he wouldn't back down. Rick's grin widened as the first bike pulled into view, followed by another and another, until the gas station parking lot was crowded with motorcycles. The riders dismounted, each one eyeing Marcus with varying degrees of suspicion and hostility. They were a rough-looking group, clad in leather and denim, their tattoos and scars telling stories of past skirmishes. They didn't seem like the kind of men who valued law or order. One of the riders, a wiry man with sharp eyes and a toothpick between his teeth, stepped forward. He seemed to hold some authority, the way the others deferred to him without question. "Rick," he said, his voice casual but firm, "what's going on here?" "This guy," Rick replied, jerking a thumb at Marcus, "thinks he can tell me what to do. He's mad because I had a little run-in with some old lady at the market." The leader's gaze shifted to Marcus, studying him carefully. He didn't seem as impulsive as Rick, but there was a coldness in his eyes that suggested he wasn't one to be underestimated. "You've got guts showing up here alone," he said, "but I'd think twice before picking a fight you can't win." Marcus didn't flinch under the man's scrutiny. "This isn't about a fight," he said evenly. "Your man assaulted my mother. I'm here to make sure he's held accountable." A ripple of laughter moved through the group, but the leader didn't join in. Instead, he raised a hand, silencing the others. "Accountable?" he repeated. "You think you're some kind of vigilant coming here to play hero?" "I'm not playing anything," Marcus replied. "But I won't let what he did slide." The leader tilted his head, his expression thoughtful. "You've got a spine, I'll give you that. But you're outnumbered, and you're far from any help. So why don't you turn around and walk away before things get messy?" Marcus took a step forward, his eyes locked on the leader's. "I'm not walking away." The tension in the air was palpable now, like the moment before a storm breaks. The bikers shifted uneasily, some glancing at Rick, others at the leader. It was clear they weren't used to someone standing up to them, especially not alone. Before the situation could escalate further, the sound of tires crunching on gravel interrupted the standoff. A police cruiser pulled into the gas station, its lights flashing but siren off. Marcus didn't turn to look, but he felt a flicker of relief. He hadn't called the cops, but their presence could shift the dynamics of the confrontation. A stocky officer stepped out of the car, his hand resting on the holster at his hip. He scanned the group, his eyes narrowing as they landed on Rick. "What's going on here?" he asked, his tone authoritative. Rick stiffened, but didn't respond. The leader stepped forward instead, his demeanor calm. "Just a misunderstanding," he said smoothly. "We're sorting it out." The officer didn't seem convinced. He glanced at Marcus, noting his steady composure. "You want to explain?" he asked. Marcus nodded. "This man," he said, pointing at Rick, "assaulted my mother earlier today. I came here to make sure he faces consequences." The officer's gaze hardened as he looked at Rick. "Is that true?" Rick opened his mouth to deny it, but the leader cut him off with a sharp look. "Let's not blow this out of proportion," the leader said, his voice measured. "If there's been a misunderstanding, we can work it out. No need for anyone to get in trouble." "An assault on an elderly woman isn't a misunderstanding," Marcus said, his voice firm. "It's a crime." The officer nodded, his hand still on his holster. "I'm going to need some identification," he said, directing his words to Rick. The tension among the bikers was palpable now. Some looked ready to argue, while others shifted uneasily, clearly weighing their options. Rick, however, remained defiant. "You've got no proof," he said, his voice dripping with bravado. "It's his word against mine." "I saw what you did," a voice called out. Everyone turned to see a young woman standing near the pumps, a cell phone in her hand. She was dressed casually, her expression a mix of nervousness and determination. "I was at the market. I saw you hit her, and I recorded it." Rick's bravado crumbled for a moment, replaced by a flicker of panic. The leader turned to him, his face stony. "Is that true?" he asked, his tone low and dangerous. Rick didn't answer, but his silence spoke volumes. The leader let out a long breath, then turned back to Marcus and the officer. "Looks like your guy's got himself in a mess," he said. "But this has nothing to do with the rest of us." Marcus didn't take his eyes off Rick, then stepped aside and let him take responsibility. The leader hesitated, clearly weighing his options. Finally, he nodded. "Fine," he said. "Rick, you're on your own." Rick's face twisted with anger, but he didn't argue. He knew better than to go against the leader's orders. The officer moved in, cuffing him, while reading him his rights. The rest of the bikers watched in silence, their expressions unreadable. As the officer led Rick to the cruiser, Marcus turned to the leader. "This isn't over," he said. "If you or your men come near my family again, I'll make sure you regret it." The leader didn't respond, but the look in his eyes said he understood. Marcus turned and walked away, his mission accomplished for now. But he knew this was only the beginning. Rick might be in custody, but the bikers weren't the kind of people to let things go easily. The tension between them was far from resolved, and Marcus had a feeling he'd be seeing them again soon. The air was thick with tension as Marcus walked back toward town, his shoulders squared and his mind racing. The immediate danger seemed to be over. Rick was in custody, and his mother was safe for now. But Marcus couldn't shake the unease gnawing at him. The leader's calm demeanor, the way the rest of the bikers had stood silently, none of it sat right with him. He had seen enough in his years as a Navy SEAL to know when someone was planning their next move. By the time Marcus reached the hospital, the sun had fully set, casting long shadows over the quiet streets. He entered the emergency room where Evelyn was being treated. The nurse at the desk recognized him immediately and guided him to a small private room. His mother was sitting up in bed, a soft smile spreading across her face when she saw him. "Marcus," she said, her voice warm but tired. "You didn't have to come running like that." Marcus pulled up a chair beside her, taking her hand gently. "Of course I did, Mom. Are you okay? Did they say anything about the bruise?" She shrugged, her expression almost playful despite the circumstances. "Just a bruise and a little soreness. I've been through worse, you know that." Marcus smiled faintly, but couldn't let go of the worry pressing on him. "I'm sorry I wasn't there sooner," he said quietly. "You have nothing to apologize for," Evelyn replied, her tone firm. "You've done more for me than I could ever ask. And from what the nurses are saying, you made quite the impression tonight." Marcus let out a soft laugh. It wasn't exactly a quiet evening. Evelyn squeezed his hand. "I know you're worried, but I'm fine, and the man who did this is being dealt with. Let it go, Marcus." But Marcus couldn't. As he sat there, the uneasy feeling grew stronger. The bikers weren't the type to let one of their own go down without retaliation, and Marcus had made himself a clear target. He didn't want to alarm Evelyn, so he nodded and gave her a reassuring smile. "You just focus on resting. I'll handle everything else." Later that night, Marcus returned to Evelyn's house. It was a modest home on a quiet street, the kind of place where neighbors looked out for each other. But tonight, the neighborhood felt different. Marcus parked his car out front and scanned the area, his eyes lingering on every shadow, every parked vehicle. He didn't see anything suspicious, but the unease in his gut refused to fade. Inside, he locked every door and window, double-checking them out of habit. His years in the military had taught him that complacency was dangerous, especially when dealing with people who had nothing to lose. He set up a chair in the living room, his back to the wall, and kept the lights off. If anyone came looking for trouble, they wouldn't catch him off guard. The hours passed slowly. The neighborhood was quiet, with only the occasional car driving by. But Marcus's instincts kept him alert, his ears tuned to every sound. Just after midnight, he heard it, the faint rumble of motorcycles in the distance. His muscles tensed as he listened, the noise growing louder with every passing second. He moved to the front window, keeping himself hidden behind the curtain. The bikers weren't trying to be subtle. 4 motorcycles pulled up to the curb across the street, their engines cutting out one by one. The riders dismounted, their silhouettes visible in the dim glow of a street lamp. Marcus recognized 2 of them from the gas station earlier, including the wiry leader with the sharp eyes. They didn't approach the house immediately. Instead, they lingered by their bikes, talking quietly among themselves. Marcus couldn't hear their words, but their body language was clear. They weren't here for a friendly chat. Marcus's mind raced as he considered his options. He could call the police, but he doubted they'd arrive in time to prevent anything from happening. And even if they did, this wouldn't end tonight. The bikers were sending a message, and Marcus knew they wouldn't stop until they got what they wanted. He moved quietly through the house, checking the back door and grabbing a heavy flashlight from the kitchen drawer. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. His training kicked in as he planned his next move, every detail carefully calculated. He wasn't going to let these men threaten his mother or anyone else in the neighborhood. Outside, the bikers finally began to move. 2 of them stayed by the bikes, while the other 2 started toward the house. Marcus watched them approach, their footsteps slow and deliberate. They were testing him, trying to see if he'd come out or stay hidden. When they reached the porch, Marcus stepped into view, opening the door just enough to be seen. "That's far enough," he said, his voice calm but firm. The leader smirked, his hands in his pockets. "We just came to talk," he said. "Didn't mean to scare you." "You're not scaring me," Marcus replied. "But if you came looking for trouble, you're going to find more than you bargained for." The leader's smirk widened. "You've got guts, I'll give you that. But you can't take all of us, and you know it. Just step aside and let us do what we came to do." Marcus didn't budge. "You're not getting past me." For a moment, no one moved. The 2 men stared at each other, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Then the leader nodded slightly, and the man beside him stepped forward. He was taller than Marcus, with a shaved head and a mean-looking scar running down his cheek. "You sure you want to do this?" the man asked, cracking his knuckles. Marcus didn't answer. He didn't need to. His stance said everything they needed to know. This wasn't over. It was just getting started.